I will now take the precedent for this meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 4th of March 2025. The following members are present: Councillors Ali Callison, Ralph Barker, Archie Buchanan, Ross Clark, Jerry Convery, Margaret Cowie, Maureen Devlin, Colin Dewar, Mary Donnelly, with apologies from Councillor Joe Fagan. Councillor Alistair Fulton is not present. Councillors Shalene Handybode and Graham Horn are present. Councillor Cal Johnson Dempsey is not present. Councillor Ross Lambie is not present. Councillor Martin Lennon is not present. The following members are present: Councillors Leslie MacDonald, David McLaughlin, Richard Nelson, Norman Ray, John Ross, Graham Scott. Councillor David Shearer is not present. Councillors Helen Toner and David Watson are present. Thank you, and I'll pass you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll move into today's business. Agenda item number 1 then is any declarations of interest. Councillor David McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chair. I'll declare an interest at items 9 and 10. I'm the Chair of Housing and Technical Resources Committee, and these properties, if passed today, will be purchased in time by my service. So I thought it apt to declare an interest.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Margaret Cowie, please.
I'm Deputy Chair.
Councillor Margaret Cowie, can you press your button again, please?
Can you hear me, Ricky?
Yeah, that's you.
I'll be the same as Davey. I'm Deputy Chair of Housing, so I'll need to declare an interest in the same items.
Thank you, Councillor Cowie. I will ask you both to leave just before the agenda item is discussed, and I'll bring you back in for the last agenda item, number 11. Any further registers of interest, declaration of interest? Okay, agenda item number 2 then is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 4th of February. These are submitted as a correct record. These are on pages 5 to 12. I'll move that as a correct record. I'll second it, Chair. All agreed? Anyone otherwise minded? Agenda item number 3 then is application P240260 for mixed-use development including residential, hotel and commercial uses, demolition and ancillary works, permission in principle at Shawfield Stadium, Rutherglen Road, Rutherglen. These are on pages 13 to 32, and I'll ask Fraser Callan to present.
Thank you, Chair. This application constitutes a national development in terms of the Planning Acts and therefore needs to be considered by the Planning Committee. It's an application for planning permission in principle and seeks to obtain consent for a potential mixed-use scheme on the site of the former or the now vacant Shawfield Stadium. The details of the scheme, if developed, would be set out in future applications, but the principle of the scheme suggested through this application includes some 450 residential units, commercial space and a reference to a potential hotel. The site currently sits within the approved Shawfield Master Plan that was approved in 2012 and is designated for office and leisure space in the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan. Section 10 of the report sets out the policy considerations that have been assessed in bringing the recommendation. Should I start again, or I've just go back in there, just in case. Oh, but just the last couple. Okay. So section 10 of the report sets out the policy considerations that have been assessed in bringing the recommendation to members today. And in summary, it is considered that the principle of a mixed-use residential-led development on the site is acceptable and complies with the wider provisions set out in the National Planning Framework and the adopted Local Development Plan. 3 letters of objection were received raising concerns on parking, amenity and scale of development, but it is noted that these are issues that will be addressed through future applications which will provide more detail on the form of the development that will be built on the site. In a similar vein, responses from statutory consultees recognise the outline nature of the scheme, and these flag up issues that will be mitigated in the list of conditions that are attached to any consent that is issued if this application is acceptable to the Planning Committee. Developer contributions will be sought to address any infrastructure deficits that could arise from the development of the site, and heads of terms of this agreement are set out in Appendix 1 to the report. So therefore, in conclusion, it is considered that this proposal is acceptable in planning policy terms and that suitable controls and conditions are in place to ensure that future development of the site can be delivered as a further important component of the long-term regeneration of the Shawfield area. So as such, subject to the conclusion of a Section 75 agreement and the imposition of the conditions set out in Section 11 of the report, members are asked to approve planning application P240260.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Margaret Cowie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just get a couple of questions. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the report. That stadium's been an eyesore for many, many years. I would like to ask about what we know about the chromium contamination in the site. I was aware when I attended the consultation maybe last year that they had identified some in the four corners of the site, and also what we're doing about the access for any future developments. Both sides of that site, the roads are extremely difficult. They're really, really busy, and it could pose problems. So thank you.
Fraser.
Okay, I think I'm back in the room now. Yeah, Councillor, no, as mentioned, though, that it's a planning application in principle. So this doesn't actually mean that development will go ahead, and there's a number of conditions that are attached that would need to be addressed prior to any development going ahead. That would include issues around how they're going to deal with any contamination or remediation on the site as well. What we are aware of is that there are issues around chromium in the wider Shawfield area, and that's actually being covered through a lot of the work that's coming forward through the Clyde Gateway project. The areas of contamination that may exist within this site may be separate because they were different from a lot of the chromium issues that were left as a result of the Whites factory that operated there for a number of years. But notwithstanding that, there are conditions that cover remediation, contamination. They would all need to be addressed before any development takes part on the site. Similar vein exists in terms of the need for there's transport assessments, there's traffic assessments, there's the impact it will have on junctions. As I say, the proposal just now is up to 450 dwellings with associated uses, but the details of that will all need to come forward in future applications, which will look to address any impact that it has on the junctions in the area. They'll need to provide provision around active travel. They need to provide provision in terms of accessibility in and around the new development. So it's at an early stage, and our conditions give us enough control to ensure that what actually takes place there is positive in terms of the regeneration of the wider area.
Thank you, Fraser. Any further questions or comments? I think this site, this vacant Shawfield Stadium, there's lots more work to be done here, but it is a start on the right direction. I think it's a good news story, but we need this work to come forward, and we need this to happen. And I just hope that for the developer that comes forward, we get something that will be good for the local area and for South Lanarkshire as a whole. I will therefore move the recommendation.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Then move on to agenda item number 4, please. It's application P240332 for the erection of house with associated landscaping and access arrangements at New Steadings Farm, Green Towers Road, Lanark, and these are on pages 33 to 42. Fraser.
Thanks, Chair. This application relates to land that is part of an existing agricultural unit, but it seeks consent for a 3-storey bedroom dwelling that would allow the agricultural unit and the agricultural facility to be sold off separately. So the determining issue in relation to the application is its assessment within the context of local and national planning policies. As set out in section 10 of the report, the proposed dwelling and the circumstances provided by the applicant are such that the proposal does not comply with the terms of Policies 4 and Policy 5 of the South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan, and in turn is contrary to Policy 10 in that a viable business case has not been provided. The proposals are also contrary to a number of policies within the National Planning Framework, and therefore, for the reasons set out in section 11 of the report presented to members, it is recommended that application P 240332 should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. Open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. Couple of things to do with this one. I'm not quite sure how a farmer who's retiring can give you a business plan for those who are taking over from him. I would have thought this was within the terms, as he is looking to retire. The siting is sufficiently far away from the steading, the agricultural buildings, for health and which helps with the health and safety implications. You don't want to be built in the yard. As for whether it is viable or not, it has been run by this family for many, many years. Yes, like many of us, we do need to take outside jobs to be able to make it pay. He's retiring, and therefore I think it is a very suitable site, and we should be granting this application.
Councillor Allison, are you moving?
I'll move that it be granted.
And can I have the reasons for that? Or can I come back to you just in a moment? And I'll.
Because under NPF 4, one of the planning that is allowed is for a farmer retiring, and that is what is happening here. The site is ideal because it is sufficiently close to the unit, yet distance allowing for health and safety.
I've just looked for just a wee second, Fraser. Have we got somebody to second, Councillor Alec Allison? There is no seconder. Councillor Allison, I'll ask if there's any further questions or comments. If there are no further questions or comments, then the recommendation then is to refuse. I will move the recommendation.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agreed. Agenda item number 5 then is application P241069 for the formation of fishing ponds and associated facilities. Section 42 application to vary the conditions at P191807 to allow continued operations at the site for a further 10-year period, and this is at Wood End Farm, Carnawath, Lanark, and these are on pages 43 to 54. Fraser.
Chair, this application is made under section 42 of the Planning Acts, and it seeks to vary a condition that was attached to a previous consent granted in 2020. The application now seeks, as you say, to extend the period of operations for a period of 10 years, and the consent to which this relates to is for the excavation of sand and gravel, which it is then intended will form fishing ponds. Section 42 applications are such that the Planning Authority cannot revisit the principle of the development and can only assess the appropriateness of the conditions that are attached to the previous consent. A letter of representation and one objection were received, but the issues raised are either legal matters that would need to be resolved beyond the planning process, or are issues that can be addressed in conditions and the ongoing monitoring of the operations at the site. Section 10 of the report to members outlines the planning considerations that relate to the extension of the operational period, and in concluding, it is considered that the amendment to condition 21 is acceptable. A range of conditions are set out in section 11 of the report, which seeks to ensure that the activity can be effectively controlled and also provides protection for the adjoining SSI, as well as making provision for a restoration bond to be put in place to ensure the restoration of the site following operational period. Therefore, for the reasons set out in section 12, it is considered that application P241069 should be approved.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Allison.
Again, a few concerns about this one, Mr Chairman, not in the principle as Fraser has said. One of the comments near the beginning about the entrance onto off the public road has been concreted. Well, there has been concrete laid there, but it is not in the control of the applicant, and it is currently fenced off and used for wintering horses. That becomes a concern because they don't have control over that piece of ground, and yesterday that was used as one of the reasons for refusal for a different application. So where is the consistency? Do we need to have control over land or don't we? Moving further in, there is, I think I'm correct in saying it's a condition 2, but I'm not certain, where it states there will be no storage of material on the eastern side of the track. Well, the storage that is there is used by the farmer for storing farmyard manure prior to spreading in the fields. It's nothing to do with the quarry. Is that going to be is that covered? Next one is a lot of concerns about what's going to happen. This is an enabling application, taking the quarrying so that you can create fish ponds. It seems to be taking a heck of a long time. Why are they needing another 10 years? And is there sufficient money in the section in the bond to be able to create fish ponds? The concerns at the moment, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Fraser?
Yeah, no, Councillor, in terms of the access, we are aware that an area has been fenced off. There still is an access that comes into that site, and as I mentioned in my summary there, there seems, I think there's a bit of an ownership legal dispute that's going on that is outside the planning controls around this, but there is an access that still exists into the facility itself. Regarding materials that are dumped, we know about there's a condition that relates to it's about the widening of the road and how materials might be dumped. There's a triple SI that sits next to that. We can control that through the planning conditions. There's also an involvement with Nature Scot on that as well. Not too sure whether or not it's actually materials that are dumped as part of agriculture or it's part of these operations. But certainly if it's part of these operations, there's controls that exist that would allow us to enforce and take action. Regarding the, sort of the final points around the bond, that's there in terms of if the developer had to go burst for want of a better description, they no longer could operate, it would restore the land to a suitable condition. There is money that sits within the bond. Whether or not we would restore it to fishing ponds, not too sure that would necessarily be the case, but it would have to be restored to a condition that means it's not having any detriment in terms of the wider environment within that area. But there's a sufficient bond that sits there that will need to be reviewed again as part of this consent. That gives us that control to ensure that we're not left with a degraded landscape should the developer's business not prove to be viable.
Pleased to hear that, Fraser, but it still doesn't answer the question about the storage of materials as to whether the farmer's going to be restricted on his activities. And secondly, well, it's not what it says there. And secondly, the access they have legal right to definitely is not concreted, so therefore it is not complying with the conditions. I think we need a deferment on this until these areas are clarified so that everyone knows exactly where they stand.
Thank you, Councillor Allison. Fraser, do you want to come back in on any of that? I'm quite happy to defer until we get more information. You happy to second that, Jerry? We're happy to move this to a deferment, if all agreed, and come back with some more information at the next committee. If I ask Councillor Allison just to make aware at the end of the meeting what he's actually looking for, and we'll try and bring this forward back to the next committee with more information. Okay, all agreed? Agreed, thank you. Agenda item number 5 is finished. We'll defer that application. Agenda item number 6 is application P241185 for the erection of single-storey house and relocation of existing stables at Nowhead Farm, Blackburn Mill Highway, Straven. These are pages 55 to 62. And again, I'll ask Fraser.
Thanks, Chair. This application relates to a site within the Greenbelt. Seeks consent for a single-storey dwelling, which the applicant states would be associated with a horse grazing stroke end-of-life care business. It is noted that the business referred to and the existing horse shelters that are on site do not benefit from planning permission, but notwithstanding this fact, the proposals for a residential unit as submitted contravene a number of local and national planning policies. No evidence or information has been provided that would justify a departure from the development plan, and added to that, the proposal is not acceptable on road safety, design and locational considerations. So as such, for the reasons set out in section 11 of the report presented to members, it is recommended that application P241185 should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Slightly confused by some stuff in this application. I agree, I'm not going to propose to change anything, but just to clarify something, I note how it says in the report, even once a house is built, the proposal is that the owners would still be required to visit the site daily to tend to the horses, as is the current position. As such, the applicant's own submission confirms that there's no need for on-site residential accommodation for the existing unauthorised business. Did they give any reason as to why this is needed? I'm just, a bit confused by that.
No, there was no, the justification wasn't provided. And as I say, it's an unauthorised business that's operating from there just now. There didn't seem to be an essential need to have a business on site from the information they presented as well. So it just contravened the policies in a number of ways.
Any further questions or comments? If there are no further questions or comments, then the recommendation is to refuse. I will go with the recommendation to refuse.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 7 is application P241282 for section 42, application to vary condition 18 of planning consent P211100 to amend position of substation associated with wind turbine at land at West Dykes, Muirkirk Road, Straven. These are on pages 63 to 74. Fraser.
Chair, this application, as with item 5 above, has been submitted under section 42 of the Planning Acts and seeks to amend the condition that was attached to a consent granted in 2021. And once again, it's confirmed that section 42 applications are such that the Planning Authority cannot revisit the principle of the actual development and can only assess the appropriateness of the conditions that were attached to the previous consent. This application seeks to change the location of a substation associated with the development, which was specifically referred to in a condition, and while noting the representations received, it's considered that this amendment is acceptable and therefore subject to the conditions being reapplied on pages 67 to 71, recommended that the application P241282 should be approved.
Thank you, Fraser. Any questions or comments, please? If there are no questions or comments, the recommendation is grant subject to the conditions. I will grant.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 8 is application P241373 for the erection of house at Newark Farm, land 135 metres northwest of Newark Mill, White Craigs Highway, Glassford, Straven. These are on pages 75 to 82. Fraser.
Chair, this application seeks consent for a 2-storey, 6-bedroom dwelling house that would be accessed via a 125-metre driveway that sits within the Greenbelt. No objections have been submitted by statutory consultees or from the consultation process, but as set out in section 10 of the report, the information and justification submitted with this application does not lead me to provide a recommendation other than refusal. The proposal would not be acceptable in terms of the local and national planning policies, and it would not be acceptable in terms of its proposed location and impact, and it has not been supported with a case to show that the dwelling needs to be in this part of the Greenbelt. So therefore, for the reasons set out in section 11 of the report, it is recommended that application P241373 should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, the recommendation is to refuse. I will refuse.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 9, I'll ask Councillor McLaughlin and Councillor Cowie to excuse themselves, and we'll shout you back in at agenda item number 11. Okay, agenda item number 9 then is application P241421 for the erection of 6 two-storey houses, 2 terrace blocks and a 3-storey block of 18 flats with associated parking, landscaping and associated services at land enclosed by High Blantyre Road, Glenlee Street and Reed Street, Hamilton. These are on pages 83 to 94. Fraser?
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a site in a residential area of Hamilton, and as you say, seeks permission for 6 houses and 18 flats with ancillary landscaping and the provision of 32 parking spaces. The application has been submitted by the JR Group, who have indicated that the development will relate to social housing, with the end user being South Lanarkshire Council. This contractual arrangement has been reported through the Housing and Technical Services Committee, but it is noted that this is not a consideration in the assessment of a planning application. 57 letters of objection have been submitted, raising a number of issues that are set out in section 7 of the report, with all of the objections available to read on the planning portal. Section 10 of the report outlines the planning policy assessment, and the development complies with the local development plan and the national planning framework. Regarding the technical aspects of the proposal, this section of the report also picks up on the issues that were raised via representations, but it is considered that, in terms of the layout, the design specifications set out in the submitted drawings, the proposals represent an appropriate form of development that would be in keeping with the surrounding residential area and will add to the supply of housing in this part of Hamilton. Representations submitted in relation to overlooking of neighbouring properties and the 3-storey aspects of the development have been assessed, and the form of development is again in keeping with the surrounding area and in planning terms is acceptable in terms of privacy, aspect, overshadowing and the setting of the building in this residential area. As part of the planning process, consultation was undertaken with the Council's Roads Service, who were satisfied with the level of parking to be provided on site, recognising that the development will be an urban area that has good links to public transport and there are bus stops a short distance from the site. The suggestion in representations that a lower amount of parking has been accepted because the proposal is for social rented housing is not the case, and to this end, this level of parking would be acceptable for this development irrespective of tenure. Therefore, subject to the conditions in section 11 and for the reasons set out in section 12 of the report to members, it is recommended that the application P240808 should be approved.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, then the recommendation is to grant subject to the conditions. I will grant.
I'll second that, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 10 then is application P241423 for the erection of 2 3-storey blocks of flats, 24 units with associated parking, landscaping and associated services at land at Backmuir Road, Hamilton. These are on pages 95 to 106. Fraser?
Thanks, Chair. As with item 9, the application has been submitted by the JR Group, with the end user for the social rented housing being South Lanarkshire Council. 21 letters of objection have been submitted, raising a number of issues that are set out in section 7, with all of the objections again available to read on the planning portal. But once again, as set out in section 10 of the report, it is considered that the proposal complies with local development plan and national planning framework policies. Regarding the technical aspects of the proposal, the section of the report also picks up on the relevant issues that were raised via objections, and once again, the layout, design and specifications of the proposals are acceptable. So therefore, subject to the conditions in section 11, and for the reasons in section 12, it is recommended that application P241423 should be approved.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. There are no questions or comments. The recommendation then is to grant subject to conditions. I will grant.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Before moving on to agenda item number 11, we'll ask Councillor Cowie to come back into the meeting and Councillor McLaughlin. Thank you. Agenda item number 11 is application P241465 for the erection of single-storey house with attic space, associated garage, studio space and formation of new driveway at land 82 metres northwest of 148 Lanark Road, Crisford and Carluke. Pages 107 to 114 in your pack. Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a site that sits outside the designated settlement boundary for Crisford, and it seeks consent for a dwelling with associated garage and studio. No objections were submitted following the consultation and publicity process, but when assessed against the relevant local and national planning policies, it is considered that the proposal raises a number of issues that bring it into contravention to these policies. As set out in section 10 of the report to members, the application submitted does not provide any evidence or a justification that would show that it complies with the various development plan policies that relate to development of greenfield sites in the rural area that sit outside the identified settlement boundary. So therefore, for the reasons set out on page 113 of the papers presented to members, it is recommended that application P241465 should be refused.
Thank you, Fraser. Open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Ross Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I know how Fraser said it's out with the settlement boundary, but it must be pretty close to being within it. I see it on the map, provided it's it's closer to the actual village than the likes of the garden centre is. But I think more importantly, the primary school is further away from this settlement boundary than the application would be. I don't know if there's a specific question in that, but I suppose it would be, is that really too far away from it? Would it really be so much of an isolated development there?
Fraser?
Yeah, no, I know the circumstances of the site are such that it is out with the defined settlement boundary. There's also, in terms of the way that Crisford is set out, there is a long sort of linear sort of town in itself, which has got development going down the whole length of the Clyde Valley. That this isn't a gap site, and a precedent could be set in terms of if this development that is not within the settlement boundaries considered acceptable. It opens up a number of other sites that exist along that road. It just is it's a statement of fact that it's not within the settlement, so therefore contravenes the policy. So we'd be acting against our own policies if we did come up with a separate recommendation than what we're giving to members today.
Councillor Allison.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. One of the points has been covered by Councillor Clark just now. The other one I have, though, is there has been some lobbying regarding this. And one of the things we've been told is that this site at one time had a building on it. I believe it was a packing station. But it's saying here in the papers that it's a greenfield site. I'm just looking for some clarity around that. Because again, although it's not in the curtilage of the village, it is certainly within, we can call it the curtilage of other housing. And if we are looking to support the rural communities, again, this is another good example that's down for refusal.
Fraser?
Site itself is naturalised. It's the site has greened over, as tends to happen. I'm unaware of a previous use that might have existed on that site, but as with a lot of areas over time, it's certainly returned to a greenfield status. In terms of the proposal here, as I say, it's not within the designated settlement of Crossford. Through a review of the local development plan, we may want to consider the settlement boundary around Crossford, but as it stands just now, the site isn't within that defined settlement, so it runs contrary to policy. But certainly the site is naturalised. It's a greenfield site. It doesn't look as that it's not renewing, or it's not suggesting about renewing a previous development that was on the site, trying to bring forward something that is a historic character. The site is a greenfield grassed area, and as I say, it's contrary to the policy that South Lanarkshire has approved.
Would that be pertinent then, Fraser, to bring that back under the LDP that we're doing at the moment and looking into that?
We wouldn't review the LDP boundary based on one particular planning application, but what we would have to, as part of the LDP, we're reviewing all the settlement boundaries, looking to make sure that they are appropriate, making sure that the opportunities for housing in the correct location would be identified. So, yeah, that would be part of that LDP process. We'd be looking at settlement boundaries.
Thank you, Fraser. Bring him back in. Councillor Allison, please.
Something has greened over. Sorry, just because something has greened over, it does not make it grass. That is still a brownfield site, although it is perhaps covered in weeds now. It is not a grassed area, what you're describing. So therefore I don't think the categorisation is right, and it should be considered a brownfield site and therefore considered for development.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not disputing the fact that it's not within the local development plan, but the point that Councillor Allison raised, I pressed my button, he came in and asked that. I made that comment. I'd like to ask the question, what criteria would you use to determine when something is no longer a brownfield site? I'm just looking for some clear guidance, because I suppose it's about perspective. Because it looks green, does that necessarily mean that it's a greenfield site? Because if weeds can grow over something fairly quick, and it can look green, but it's not necessarily a greenfield site. I'm just looking for some guidance on that. Not that I'm disputing the application. I'm just curious, given the question's been asked.
Yeah, it's possibly in the terms of there's sections 10.6, 10.7 within the report, and that refers to the conversion reuse of buildings, and it would be circumstances where a development of this nature could be acceptable. It also goes on in terms of the need around renewing existing buildings or previous development. The site that stands there, we have, the officers did assess the historic mapping. And going back to the late 1900s or 1800s, there didn't seem to be any development that was on that site. So there isn't anything that would really show that has the characteristics of being a brownfield site. Excuse my kind of urban terminology in terms of what constitutes grass mill. Maybe that's not like my understanding of agricultural business, but it's a site that it's not what would be considered as a derelict site. It's not a vacant site. It's not a site that's degrading this part of the countryside, this part of the rural area. It has greened over. It is vegetated over. But there isn't any former buildings that are on the site that this really could. It's building on foundations that were there. It's a site that sits beyond the settlement boundary, and that being the case, there isn't a justification for it in terms of our policies.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? If there are no further questions or comments, then the recommendation is to refuse. I will refuse the application.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 12 then. There are no items of urgent business. Can I ask the clerk to stop the recording of the meeting, please, and wish you all an enjoyable day. Thank you.